Okay. That's on. That's on. How about now? Yes. We can hear you. Awesome. Cool. So good morning, Calgary. A couple things to give some context to this lecture. This lecture is about project management and project planning, which means we're not going to really be talking about code so much. There will be a very little bit, but it's mostly about the things that you as a developer need to be paying attention to before you start a project of this size. As the screen says, you're not ready to code yet. So if any teams have started coding, oops. I'll also give the full disclaimer that this lecture gets referred to as the sermon because I get preachy. And the reason I get preachy is because I can literally say I wrote the book on this. So I'm super passionate about this particular topic because I've seen entire companies fail because they didn't do this process correctly. So with that disclaimer given, the other one is this is not the only way to plan a project. So don't take a lot of the things I'm going to say as dogmatic. Just understand that if you do it this way, I can guarantee it works. Connor's typing. Connor's not typing. Cool. Please provide Amazon link to book after. I will definitely do that. In fact, I'll give you the other link, which gets it for you for 50% off. So, you got your teams yesterday, and you've got a list of projects that you can pick from. And in having a list of projects that you can pick from, what I encourage you to do is to view this as if you had just gotten hired by Lighthouse Software Incorporated, dropped onto a dev team, and you're told, hey, we have a new client and they want you to build X. Well, not X, but X. Pick a new variable, Don. They want you to build this particular product. There is a list of specs that the client has given us that are in Compass for each project, and that's the minimum set of features that you have to deliver. You're not going to necessarily be passionate about any one of these, and that's not the issue. That should not stop you from being passionate about building a good product. You may not even particularly care about any one of these, and that shouldn't matter. That should not stop you from being passionate about doing good work and working well with your team and delivering the best code that you can. Because you're not always in the real world going to be able to work on something that makes you want to jump up out of bed and go, oh, I'm working on the best product ever. What matters is that you're able to solve problems. That's the key piece. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Nobody hires you to code. That's not what we get hired to do. We get hired to build and support products for clients, or for the company that's hired us. That's our job. And so this is an opportunity for us to do our job really well. So you're going to pick one of these, and I would encourage you not to waffle too much past about noon today. So give yourself maybe one more hour for second guessing after lecture, and pick one of these and commit to it, because this is going to be your life for the next 5 days. And then as a team, you're going to ask the question, where do I start? And this is the thing which causes the most frustration for people when, especially for new developers, when they're diving into a big project. We've done the work for you so far with TinyApp and Tweeter, and even to some degree with these, because we've given you, here's step one, here's the first feature you have to deliver. In this case, we've just given you the list of all the features that you're going to have to deliver, and it's up to you to figure out how you're going to approach that. So when you ask yourself where you're going to start, I'm going to tell you without exception, you're always going to start with your data. And here's the reason why. Your data is your product. So I want to take you on a bit of a thought experiment. I want you to imagine a world that is exactly like the world we live in right now. There's a big, huge social media giant called Tweetbookagram. It's where we share everything, pictures of our lunch, cat gifs, misattributed quotes, everything. We poke people, we invite them to play Candy Crush, we take pictures and add filters, and it's all under 280 characters. Like that's the world of Tweetbookagram. And everybody posts to it all day long. But in this alternate universe where Tweetbookagram exists, there's also an evil little wizard that hates social media. And this evil little wizard works on a spell that's going to get rid of social media forever. And wizard waves their magic wand, and the app, the website, all of the code that runs Tweetbookagram disappears. Poof, gone. There's no app on your phone anymore. There's no website when you go to the domain to load it up. It makes the news. TMZ.com reports on it. Pretty soon Talk Radio has a conspiracy theory about it. Trump blames the Mexicans. Like, it's a whole big thing. Worldwide productivity spikes by about 25% because people now actually can't, distract themselves from work and have to actually do work. But Tweetbookagram, being a huge multi-billion-dollar company, they employ about 600 developers. They all jump on top of rebuilding the app and the site. Within about 2 weeks, we are back to sharing memes like we did before. We are back to talking, we're vague booking and we're talking about what we had for lunch, and, everybody knows what soup everybody else had, and the world kind of gets back to normal. And in fact, Tweetbookagram thrives because all the old stuff that they had been keeping around for the past 5 or 6 years in their product is now gone, and they can just focus on all the new things that they want to do. If anything, Tweetbookagram gets better. That really pisses off the wizard. So what the wizard does is he comes up with another spell, waves their magic wand, poof, the database and all of the backups for Tweetbookagram are gone. You go to log in, you don't have an account. The 2.2 billion accounts that populated Tweetbookagram are now all gone. All of the posts, all of the pictures, all the pokes, all of the comments, all the likes, all the shares, gone. Even if you recreate your account, there's nothing there. And even with all the new features that they put in there, none of them do anything because there's no data to back them up. Tweetbookagram doesn't survive this. Dies. The reason it dies is because the product that they were actually offering was not the website or the app. It was that particular access to that data. QuickBooks Online, that site could go away tomorrow. The QuickBooks app could go away tomorrow. But as long as someone can figure out a way to get access back to the data that QuickBooks has, QuickBooks would survive. The data is the product. And that means that all the code that we write, all the CRUD features we build, all of the interesting dashboards or graphs and charts that we might ever create, all the data science we might ever do, all the infographics we may make, the cool sliding accordion things and fade in and fade out transitions, all the neat CSS effects we apply, all of that is happening to our data. It's not happening to the app. It's not happening to the user. It's happening to the data. Every app that we are ever going to build, TinyApp was about access to the set of short URLs and long URLs. Tweeter was about access to the individual sets of messages, who wrote them and where, what they wrote. Every app that you're going to build is about that access to data. So that's where you start. There's 3 questions you can ask yourself. What is the data that you can access or acquire? Where am I going to get my data from? Am I getting it from an API? Am I getting it from my users? Are they typing it in for me? Am I going to download it from some other place? Like, am I getting the USDA nutrition facts and the caloric data for all the food in the world? Where am I getting my data from? By the way, if you ever access that data set, it's about 9 gigs, and they're all CSV files. Ha ha. So where am I going to get my data from? If you don't know where that's going to come from, you literally cannot build an application. You have to know where that data is going to come from first. Can you correlate that data to something else? This is important because individual data points are not interesting. If I tell you that it's 4 degrees outside, you're like, okay, great, that's a fact I know now. But if I tell you that it's 4 degrees today, but it's going to go down to -2 tonight, that's now a correlation. You're like, oh, wow, it's almost balmy now compared to what it's going to be tonight. Might as well be wearing shorts. I'm not even going to talk about what the weather is in Calgary. Sorry, guys. And so if I tell you, for example, that, let's say you go on something like Skip the Dishes. The fact that you are in this building at 401 West Georgia here and in the Edison in Calgary, that's an interesting data point. Yay, fantastic, we know where we are. But it stops being interesting after that. But knowing that the restaurant that you're ordering from on Skip the Dishes is only 5 minutes away, now there's a correlation. Now there's something that you can take action on, like you can choose that restaurant versus another one that may be 10 minutes away because theoretically you're going to get your lunch faster. Correlations of data are where we're actually able to start providing value. And then how can you pivot that data? And good pivot, GIF from Danella. So pivoting the data means how are you going to present the data in a way that is going to give value to the user. So for example, Skip the Dishes does it with pins on a map. That's the pivot of that data. How do we position that data, present it to the user in a way that allows it to be relevant? If you go to the Weather Network website and you're looking at the temperature, you're going to see it on a graph because that allows you to see that presentation and see it in relation to everything else that is relevant. Couldn't really put weather data as pins on a map so much. So it's the pivot of the data that really starts to add the major value. And when we talk about adding value in an application, we have to talk about these 2 words. And the reason we have to talk about these 2 words is because one of them has to do with value. The other one doesn't. Users do not pay for features. And when I say pay, I mean money or time. Nobody has gone and picked an app because of the cool drop-down menu on the autocomplete. Nobody picks an app because the button has a green gradient on it. No one, goes and picks one website over another because of the cool Ajax on the login. That's not why you pick an app. You pick an app because it gives you a distinct benefit. The features could actually be super minimal. But if it does what you need it to do, that's the app that you're going to use. And in order to explain that benefit, we have to walk over to the marketing and the philosophy parts of the campus, quite frequently teaching the same things. And we have to talk about something called the universal values. And the universal values, as minimalist as it may sound, as reductionist as it may sound, actually govern every single decision you make. From the clothes you wear, to the music you listen to the boot camp you chose, who you date, all of that, come down to one of these 4 things. We want to look good, feel good, save time, save money. When I say look good, I mean we want other people to think that we make good choices. We want other people to think that we are smart and interesting and funny and attractive and talented, and that we have good taste in things, and that we have good fashion, and that we are generally, good, happy people that are going to make the world a better place. That's how we want other people to see us. We also want to be able to look in the mirror in the morning and feel good about ourselves and think all of those good things about ourselves. And they don't often match, by the way, because we will do a lot of things to look good that don't make us feel good, drinking on Friday nights. We will also do a lot of things to feel good that don't necessarily make us look good. Interestingly, we call that integrity. We also want to save time. We want to save money. When I say save time, we have to be aware, as morbid as it may be, that time is the one thing that we don't know how much we have. You know, crane could fall over right now, take out the entire building, we'd be done. We have no control over that. So anything that allows us to make the most of the time that we have, now everybody's staring at the crane, anything that allows us to make the most of the time we have is something that we want to do. You know, elevators were not made just to make it, you know, so that we didn't have to climb stairs. It's because going straight up is faster than going back and forth in a switchback. Plus, it does make it easier to go upstairs. We also want to save money. And money, again, doesn't just mean cash. It means all the resources we have. The clothes in our closet, the food in our pantry, the gas in our gas tank. Like, we worked to accumulate those resources. So we want to preserve them. We want to conserve them. So the less resources we have to spend to accomplish all the things in our life, the more likely we are to do something. That's why we like free so much. So these universal values are how we determine if something benefits us. It has to speak to at least one of these four things. When you're building an application, if it doesn't speak to one of these four things, you're not likely to use it. And you're definitely not going to use it on a consistent basis. At most, you might download it, run it once. You know, if you think about when iOS first came out, the App Store first came out, there were like 9,000 fart apps in the App Store. And everybody downloaded it, pushed the button once, giggled like a 12-year-old, and promptly uninstalled it. Except for 12-year-olds who then, you know, pushed it all the time. And for the moment, it made you look good, it made you feel good. You know, everybody's like, they have that app, okay, and then you're done. But every single product that we choose to use in our everyday lives is because it touches one of these things. So, how do we accomplish this? How do we start planning an app that's going to allow us to benefit users? We start with user stories, because you're not ready to code yet. So what's a user story? User story follows this basic format. As a blank, I want to blank because blank. So this is, as a role, I want to take an action because there's a benefit. For example, as an author, I want to post my content on the web because I want to share it with other people. As an admin, I want to reset a user's password because they should be able to access their account. I can vary this a little bit and describe my user stories as entitlements, and I don't mean millennial entitlements. I mean things you should actually be able to do. Bless you. So, for example, as a user, I should be able to edit my content because I want to make sure it's correct for other people. You know, as a guest, I should be able to create a user account because I want to join the site. So these describe entitlements, things that within the role you're in, logically you should be able to do. And so we take a user story and then we pair it with something called a user scenario. So the user story describes the feature and the user scenario describes how you would use it. Given, when, then is the formula here. Given that I'm in a situation, when I take an action, then a positive benefit happens, or then some result happens. Given that I'm on the login page, when I provide the correct credentials, then I am given access to my account. Given that I'm an admin, when I click on the admin link, then I'm taken to the dashboard. Those types of descriptions of what I'm doing. Given that I'm on the post creation page, when I choose to upload an image, then it is added to my post. Describes the scenario of actually using a particular feature. So then we get to this point, and this screenshot comes from a link that I'm going to send you afterwards. And the article was written on Medium way back in November of 2014. And it was a proposal for a framework for user stories that dramatically improve a developer's ability to spec out their product. So the user story has a title. The user story starts with the traditional user story format. And in the article, because it was written on medium.com, the author, whose name I can never pronounce, the author wrote the user story from the context of medium.com. So as a user, I want to save a story I'm reading because I found it useful. In this particular case, this describes being on medium.com and wanting to take advantage of their save story feature. Afsha, if you want to grab one of the comfy chairs, feel free to do so. Okay. So then that's the user story. Then we add the scenario in, which is given that I'm reading a story, when I tap the icon to save a story, then save it to my saved stories. So this gives me a really clear picture of what this feature is and how I might choose to implement it. Then down at the bottom, there's additional info. That's metadata for this feature. In this case, I might link the bookmark icon that I'm going to click on there. I might put a link to the wireframe that's going to describe where this particular icon is going to go. There's a whole bunch of things that I can put down there in the metadata section. But this describes it quite well, and the author took it further, and he added an "and" to the user scenario. Given that I'm reading a story, when I tap the icon to save a story, then save it to my saved stories and alter the icon to indicate success. So here's the thing. If I grab this and I give it to John, he's going to have a pretty good idea already of how to build this out. So we've got a stories page. It's got story content on it. There's going to be an icon there. They're going to be able to click on that icon, so that icon probably is wrapped in either an A tag or a form or something that's going to allow me to click on it. And that's going to send something to the server that's going to associate my users and my stories as a saved story. And when I get a positive response, like I could probably do that with Ajax, actually, a click handler and an Ajax call. And so my success function, if I get success back, I'm going to change the SRC of the image so that it's a different image to indicate success. Like, you can think through how you might accomplish this task just by reading this user story. So this describes a feature. So now imagine that you sat down and you wrote one of these out for every feature that you planned to deliver in your application. I know that sounds crazy because you didn't become developers because you wanted to type, but this actually tells you what you're going to be building before you actually have to put hands on keys and start typing it. So it comes to the idea of what is feature complete. Well, you've got the list of features that are spec'd out in Compass, but you also have ideas about things that you might want to add in. What you have to ask yourself is, what is the complete set of features that allow you to deliver and demo an app on Monday? You got 5 days. And that seems like a lot of time in boot camp terms, and it is, but it's also not a lot of time in the grand scheme of things. You still have to eat a couple times, sleep at least once, please bathe at least once in that time for our sake, if nobody else's. But you've got to come up with an MVP. And so if you haven't heard that acronym before outside of sports, you may ask, what is an MVP? Well, MVP stands for minimum viable product, which is what is the minimum set of features that you need to deliver that prove that your app has benefit. It's not to prove that it works, it's to prove that the app, the solution to the problem that you have provided, has a benefit. One of the best ways that you can do that when you are coming up with your list of features is to decide on your aha moment. And the aha moment exists in every single application. Let's take Instagram for just a moment. The aha moment for Instagram is not being able to take a picture with a $1,000 phone and then apply a filter to it so it looks like it was taken with a $5 camera. That's not the aha moment. The aha moment is that you can take a picture, post it, and immediately get feedback on it. Immediately have people liking it, resharing it, commenting on it. You're able to take that photo and immediately the world can engage with that particular photo. That's the aha moment for Instagram. That's why they were worth over $1 billion to Facebook. So that aha moment is the one feature that you deliver in your application that makes people have the light bulb go on and makes them realize that they want to use that product. Your aha moment is special. In every app, even if we have multiple groups doing the exact same app, you may have your aha moment in different places depending on how you intend to implement the features that you do. But in your list of user stories, you're going to want to put a star on that one because that's the contract. That's the one that you really need to make sure that as a team you are nailing, because that is what is going to convince other people that your app is worth using. So, speaking of coming up with lists of features, I have to talk about this picture. Anybody know what this picture is? Anybody know what this house is? I'll give you a hint. It's in Southern California. Winchester House. Yes, you get a virtual cookie. Yeah, this is the Winchester House, also called the Winchester Mansion, also called the Winchester Haunted Mansion. And this house has a great story. Tell me what you know about the Winchester House.
Winchester family, similar to the company that built the ends. Wife, well, husband died, wife went crazy, built a bunch of roofs that did nothing. Pretty much it.
Okay, so good summary. I'll recap. So this is the house of Sarah Winchester. Sarah Winchester is the widow of Sam Winchester of Winchester rifle fame, aka the gun that won the West. And Sam, when he died in the late 1800s, left his widow a rather sizable fortune. At that point, it was about $25 million in late 1800s dollars, which if you bring it up to modern day is about $500 million. So she was very, very, very wealthy, to the point that money didn't matter. And unfortunately, for every dollar that she had, she was that equal amount stark raving nuts. And it's unfortunate that she was plagued by mental illness. But as was the fashion of the time, she was very prone to visiting mediums and psychics and going to seances and things like that, because she believed that she was genuinely troubled. And so through going to these people, she believed that she was haunted. And very specifically, she believed she was haunted by the ghosts of all the people killed by her husband's rifles. She refused to allow a gun in the house. And the story of this house comes from visiting a medium at one particular point in her life. And the medium, by the way, the medium's husband was a general contractor. That becomes very relevant in just a moment. The medium supposedly channeled the spirit of her dead husband. We weren't there. We don't know. And according to the account, her dead husband told her that the way for her to escape the ghosts that were haunting her was to start building a house, and to never stop building the house, because then the ghosts would be trapped in the house and she would be safe. Coincidentally, the medium's husband was a general contractor. Very convenient. Also reportedly, he wasn't doing so well at that point and needed work. So Sarah Winchester commissioned the construction of the mansion. This is only 4 stories. It used to be 7 stories, but there was an earthquake in the 1920s that leveled the top 3 floors because they weren't well built to begin with. A few interesting facts about the house. There are staircases that just go up to the ceiling, don't actually go to another floor. There are outside windows that you open it up and you're looking into another room. There's one wing of the house that you can't get to from inside the house. You literally have to crawl through a window to get there. Also, interestingly, there are over 40 bathrooms in the house and only one of them works, because Sarah believed that the ghosts were traveling through the pipes. And that one was for her. So why do I bring this up? Well, the reason I bring this up is because through her entire life, she kept paying contractors when she remembered to pay them. She kept getting contractors to add on to the house with no blueprint and no plan. And they were just told to build. Didn't matter what they built, they just had to keep building. And it's all too possible in the excitement of getting to build a big app and come up with your own set of features. It's all too possible to build a Winchester mansion if you do not have a clear plan of what it is you're trying to build. In fact, before I go on, I'm gonna give you a word of advice. The 5 most dangerous words in software development are "wouldn't it be cool if." The reason those are the 5 most dangerous words is because when they come up in the point where you're building features, the answer is always yes. Yes, it would be cool if you could build that feature. Yes, it would be cool if you added that extra library. Yes, it would be cool if you did this cool thing with the database, or this other cool thing with JavaScript, or this neat CSS thing you saw on CodePen. Yeah, it would be really cool. With an infinite amount of time, an infinite amount of money, you would eventually have a crystal castle floating in the sky on a cloud, unicorns, farting glitter from turret to turret, and it would be beautiful. You've got 5 days. So, unfortunately, the HR team has told me that I'm not allowed to buy the squirt bottles from the dollar store for students. Something about, physical harassment. But the reason I would want to do that and arm all... Davey has a Nerf gun, and he's not afraid to use it, by the way. But the reason is, when you are sitting down and planning out your project, anytime somebody starts a sentence with "wouldn't it be cool if," everyone should just be able to be like, no, bad. You have to stop that, because the answer is always yes. You only have 5 days, so you want to be really smart with your time. In fact, you want to look at the list of features that you're planning to build, and you want to separate them into the ones that you are planning to build and then a set that are stretch goals. And it's okay if that stretch goals grows and grows and grows. That's okay. Because once you get done with the core MVP set of features, and if you have time, that's when you start cherry picking from the stretch goals and picking which individual thing one at a time you're going to build and add. And then if you get done with that one, you can grab another one if you have time. But if you decide that you're going to build this app and you only have time to build this app, things are going to go poorly. And you're going to be stressed out, and you're going to be pulling your hair. I frequently don't have that problem. But I did, and that's why I'm in this state now. So, when it comes to things that you are planning to build, if you aren't going to demo it, you don't need to build it. So, for example, you don't need to build a full startup front page landing page for your business. You're not building a business, you're building a product. So we don't need an FAQ, we don't need a team page, we don't need an About Us page, we don't need the standard hero image at the top and blah, 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 and all that. Don't need it. You also don't need sign-up pages or login pages. And that sounds controversial, but quick show of hands. Has anyone ever watched someone log into a site and just been blown away? You ever just had your jaw drop in awe at watching someone sign up for a website? No? No one? No? Okay. Yeah, there's a reason. It's boring. Also, we already know that you know how to build a login. And standing up here in front of your peers and a brand new cohort and all of the staff is the one time that you are guaranteed to screw up your name when typing it. It's also, if you're going to test at test.com 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you're going to mess that up. I mean, you see how many typos I make up here, and I'm used to doing this. I've been, up here doing this for years, and I still typo when I'm up here. So if you're not used to typing in front of somebody, it's like having, 50 people watching you type, and, when mentors come over, everybody already gets boxing gloves as it is. So multiply that times 50. Plus, when it comes to logging into a site, do this. 4 lines of code in Express, and you're now able to log in as any user you want. Though I will say, if you do this in production, I reserve the right to beat you until my arms are sore. Never, ever, ever do this in production. But for your midterm project, this is not your billion-dollar startup. For your midterm project, give yourself some login routes. Then you can log in as an admin user, as a guest user, as a, if you're doing the restaurant app, you can log in as the restaurant or the customer, nice and easy. In fact, you could just make A-links for yourself that automatically log you in as whatever user you want. You're done. In fact, if you're really smart, what you'll do is not even worry about giving yourself links. You'll just know which IDs are for which users, and you'll use like Chrome and incognito mode, and you'll automatically be logged in as 2 different users when you come up here to demo. This saves you tons of time, and this is 4 lines of code. Don't spend the time building things that you don't need to show. Nobody really wants to see you log in. Also, that does not mean get up here on Monday morning and go, well, Don said don't log in. No, Don said don't waste the rest of our time. That's what Don said. Cool, we've got user stories. We know what features we're going to deliver now. We have an idea of the data that we're going to collect and how we're going to present it. So now let's start talking about the data design. Let's start talking about ERD. You're not ready to code yet. You're going to build an ERD, and it's going to be your starting place. You're going to build an ERD with the idea that tables are nouns. And this is a great way to think about what tables you actually need in your application. New users to SQL have a tendency to make not necessarily more tables than are necessary, but to make connections between tables that are unnecessary. Your tables are your nouns. And when I say nouns, I'm talking about your user stories. That's why these are important. As a user, noun. I want to save a story, noun, that I'm reading, because I found it useful. Given that I'm reading a story, same noun. When I tap the icon to save the story, still same noun. Then save it to my saved stories. New noun. I now know 3 tables that I need. I need a users table. I need a stories table. I need a saved stories table. My saved stories table is going to act like a join table because it's the unique combination of a user and a story. But that it is a genuine noun in my application. That is a story that I have saved to read later. So there might be other information that's connected to that, like when I saved it. So I might put timestamps on that table as well. So now it's not just 2 IDs in a table. It has its own ID, and then a user ID and a story ID and a created at and an updated at. Those might be there when I create this particular table. And that's just from one user story. Imagine if I had 25 user stories, and I went through and I pulled the list of nouns from all of them. I now know what tables I need to build. And once I know what the table name is, once I know what the noun is, I can look at that and use all the squishy white matter up here and decide what needs to go in that table. So a story. What's a story need? Well, a story needs a title. Story needs a body. Story needs an author. Well, that's going to be a user, so that's just a user ID, foreign key to the users table. Maybe that story is going to have, when it was published, and maybe a Boolean for whether it's published or not. Let's let's make up, if that's a feature that we decided so that we could have drafts and published versions, well, maybe I have a Boolean for whether it's published or not. What's a user going to have? Username, email address, maybe a password, flag for whether they're an admin or not. Cool. I have a starting place now. I can look at my ERD. I can figure out what fields I'm going to start with. That tells me what my initial migrations are going to look like. It does not mean that these are inscribed in gold now and can never be touched. This is your starting point. Migrations happen. There's a bumper sticker that says something very similar. But migrations will happen in your application. And that's because as you go through and start building more features, your definition of your data and your access to your data is going to grow. But when you're coming up with your ERD, I highly encourage you to follow this big piece of advice. Store your data the way you're going to query your data. So looking at this, I know that I'm going to be on a stories page. And that is going to be a specific story, so I'm going to have select star from stories where ID equals something. Maybe I want to left join the user because I'm going to show the user information on that page as well. Okay, so now select star from stories, left join users on stories.authorID equals users.id, where stories.id equals 12, semicolon. I now know the query that I'm going to have. I can think about that ahead of time. And if I know that, then I know that those two tables are going to have a foreign key relationship. And I can simplify, I can come up with the simplest possible way for me to get that data that I need. Any way that I can make my data storage simpler is going to be a good thing. So, normally this would be the point in the process where you would start making some tech choices. The tech choices are pretty easy here because for your midterm at least, they're limited. The first tech choice that we need to make is about deployment. You're still not ready to code. When I say deployment, I mean where is your app going to be when you show it off on Monday? You got two choices, really. You can run it locally, localhost 3000. That is in fact the simplest and easiest and most straightforward option for almost all of you. You may choose to deploy it to Heroku. There's a couple reasons for doing this. One, you want more experience deploying to Heroku. Also, for example, the two-player game, if you don't want to worry about trying to figure out the local IP address and you just want to deploy it to Heroku so that you can show that two people can connect to the game and play the game, that would be a good reason to deploy it to Heroku. Don't think that you have to do that for cool points. It's not going to make a bit of difference at the end of the boot camp when it comes to employment, and it's not going to make your friends and peers love you more. Because if you deploy to Heroku but end up delivering a substandard product because you spent so much time on your deployment, then all you've done is take a bad app on your local machine and put it on somebody else's computer. Do it because it's the right thing to do. And then start planning to do it now. This is a decision you make today before you write a single line of code. And you make it today because it's going to impact other decisions you're going to make along the way. It's not something you do on Sunday night where as a team you're like, oh cool, we built all our features, what should we do now? I don't know, let's push to Heroku. No, that's just stress inducing. Don't do that. Make this decision early. And again, the best option for most everyone is just demoing off of localhost 3000. You're not ready to code, and you need to make some decisions about the server. In 4 weeks, when you're in that room having the talk that they're having right now, this becomes much more interesting because there are more options. For midterms, it's pretty easy and straightforward. You're going to use Node, you're going to use Express. But this is also the point when talking about the server side where you start looking at NPM modules. where you start looking at what it is you want to build, what features you're going to need. For example, if you're doing the restaurant ordering app, you're probably going to want to look at something like Twilio for being able to send and receive text messages or voice calls. So you're going to need an NPM module for that. If you're going to be doing a lot of work with dates, you're probably going to want to look at Moment. If you're going to be working with something like the Amazon or Google APIs, you're going to need the NPM modules for being able to connect to their API. If you're going to be doing a lot of work with mapping, maybe you need an NPM module for that. There's a, now is when you start asking yourself, how much of the wheel do I have to reinvent, or does someone else have a nice shiny round wheel that I can stick on my car and use? Big slide to say don't forget about NPM. And then you're going to get to your routes, and this is the last thing we'll talk about before we take a break. You're going to get to your routes after you've made your tech choices, and you're thinking about how you're actually going to get all these features to work in those tech choices. And you're going to realize you're definitely not ready to code yet because you don't even know what your routes are. And as a team, you're going to want to sit down and plan out your routes. So things to consider. What HTTP verb is the correct one for each route that you need to make? Most of yours will probably be get and post. However, you may decide to be semantically correct. You may decide to include the method override NPM module, and you may decide to use put, patch, and delete, which will now be doing, you can send those verbs through using AJAX and then have the server respond accordingly. In your routes, you need to make a decision like, are you going to have params in your URLs? On your get routes, do you need query strings? On your post routes, what fields need to come through from the form to the server side to be in the params? I can't encourage you enough to use RESTful conventions. There is a basic pattern, /nouns, /noun/verb, /noun/id, and /noun/id/verb. Those are your RESTful patterns. They're chainable. They can repeat over and over and over again. Following those conventions makes it very easy to connect up your CRUD actions with your tables. Because if tables are nouns, routes are the verbs. And so where do you figure out that? Guess what? You're going to go back to your user stories. As a user, I want to save a story I'm reading. Well, that's get/stories/id because I found it useful. Given that I'm reading a story, same route. When I tap the icon to save a story, maybe that's a post now to /stories/id/save as the verb. Then save it to my save stories and alter the icon to indicate success. Awesome. I now know 2 routes that I'm going to need to build. I need one for viewing a story, and I need one for saving that route or saving that story in my saved stories. Very clear RESTful conventions for what those are supposed to be. I know which verb. I know that when I am doing /stories/id/save, I'm saving an individual story. My story ID is going to be a param in my URL. My user that I'm associating that save stories with is the currently logged in user in the app. So now I know every piece of information that needs to go in my database. I know where I'm going to get it from, and I know how it gets to the server side. Cool. I can probably extrapolate, if I don't have another user story for it, that I should probably have a route that's /stories/saved that is going to show me a list of all of my saved stories. Or I could have it be /saved_stories or something like that. I'm going to have a route that'll be a get route that'll be an index style page, the B in bread browse, that is going to show me all of the saved stories for my account. I now know that, again, just from one user story. Imagine if I went through all 15 to 20, 25, however many user stories my team has spec'd out, and I figured out every route that was going to be necessary and what data was going to be passed where. That suddenly turns into a to-do list of what I have to build. And if I know the routes that are going to service a particular user story, I probably want to stick them down here in the bottom section, so that I know, looking at every single user story that I've planned to build, what routes are doing that. And if I get to the end of my user stories and I have user stories that don't have routes, I'm not done planning my routes yet. And if I get to the end of my planning and I have routes that aren't assigned to user stories yet, I have to ask if I really need them or not. Because now is not the time for me to invent features unless I find something critically missing. I've decided what features I'm going to deliver. I've decided how much work we're signing the team up to do. So if I've suddenly come up with these other routes that don't match up to user stories, am I genuinely missing user stories? Well, it's a great time to figure that out now instead of Saturday afternoon. It's much better to figure out that you're missing something that you need now before you've started committing code to anything, when you're still in the planning stage, while it's still a clear, happy path to building everything, than getting into the middle of your build and suddenly going, oh shit, I missed this whole blind spot here that I now need to go very quickly, hastily plan out, possibly make some mistakes with, scramble, panic, cause stress and angst and drama on the team. Don't need to do all that. Save yourself the grief. Let's go ahead and take a break here. About 10 minutes, we'll come back and we'll talk about wireframing. All right, so let's dive back in. So when we left off, you knew how you were going to store your data. You knew what language you were going to be coding in. You had a good idea of what libraries and frameworks you were going to be using. You had your user stories written. You had your aha moment labeled. You'd kept yourself from building a Winchester mansion. So now we get to wireframing. And if you haven't done wireframing before, it's an interesting process. In wireframing, a lot of people equate wireframing 100% with design. And that's only true in terms of layout. Wireframing is not colors, it's not typography, it's not anything other than data hierarchy on the page. It is how we demonstrate the interactions that are going to happen. So here we have a basic wireframe for a profile page. Anytime in a wireframe you see a square with an X on it, that is where an image is going to go. And so we can start to see the relationship of the data. We can start to see the major layout choices. Like this is 3 rows on the page. There are 3 rows in this layout. Each row has a certain number of columns. The top row has 3 columns. The middle row has 1 column. And the bottom row has 3 columns. So that means even if we just started out and drew big boxes and said where each, what each big box was going to contain, that gets us started in the wireframing process. But when people start wireframing, especially if they're new to it, there's a couple of very human gotchas that come up. So I use this wireframe to tell a story, true story, it happened. Long time ago, when Lighthouse first started, I think we were in our first year even, there was a startup that was in Launch Academy with us that hired one of our graduates to build their MVP. That's a very daunting thing to build an app of that size for a brand new graduate out of boot camp. So the deal was I would basically act as the senior dev on the project, give feedback, provide structure, architecture, kind of get the ball rolling for them, and they would then work within I would project manage the project and they would work within that, and I would be reviewing their code and be there for both moral and technical support. And about 2 weeks into the project, the business owner, she sends me a message and she's like, I've got to meet with you right now. Okay, I scheduled some time that day. We had a meeting and she was angry. She was frustrated. She was very upset. She's like, he's taking too long. He's not doing it right. I think I picked the wrong person. He keeps having to rebuild everything I tell him to do. This isn't just it's just not going well. So I start asking all the standard damage control questions. Does he, and the thing is, I've been working with him every day. So I know he's been working his butt off. So I'm asking her questions like, well, do you guys have a morning stand-up? Does he tell you what he's working on? Does he show you what he's built after he built it? Yes, yes, yes. Does he play a lot of foosball? Because there's a very good foosball table over there. Yeah, he plays every once in a while, but not too much. He's getting, he's working hard. She keeps repeating, well, he keeps having to rebuild everything I tell him to build. Like, okay. Red flag pops up in the back of my head. Do you have wireframes? She's like, yeah, totally I have wireframes. Great, can I see them? So she pulls out her laptop, pulls up the wireframes, and her site was, the app that she was building was for TV and film crews to be able to get temp staff. Like if you suddenly just needed, somebody for lighting and you wanted them for like a day, you could post the job on the site and then someone would be able to, apply to do that job. They'd have their profile on the site, and if the person running the shoot liked that person's profile, they'd approve them to come in and work. It was basically, temp work for PAs kind of thing. And so this is a minimal version of what the project page looked like. And so I'm looking at this, and I'm like, okay, yeah, great big hero image at the top. Totally makes sense. I get it. And then there's the description and the title of the project and description of the job that's needed. I totally get it. I see what's going on here. And then I get down to the bottom of the page. And I'm not minimizing, I'm not in any way misrepresenting what was at the bottom of the page. At the bottom of the page was a long, narrow, short box just like this that in it just said notifications. And so I was like, oh, what goes in here? And I guess she thought that I had forgotten how to read or something, because she's like, notifications. Okay. What do they look like? Do they have a picture? Is the picture on the right? Is the picture on the left? Do they scroll? Do they scroll horizontally? Do they scroll vertically? Is it going to have the author on them? What happens when I mouse over them? What happens when I click on them? Where do the notifications come from? How do I get notified that there's a new notification? Does this box expand? Does this box contract? How do I read the notifications? If there's a big message, how am I going to read it in this small box? And if any of you are fans of The Simpsons, and you remember the famous I Choo Choo Choose You episode? At the end, Bart's got the remote control for the VCR, and he's like, if you watch really closely, you can see the moment Ralphie's heart breaks. I got to see that happen in real life, and it was kind of cool, I'm not going to lie. Because my barrage of questions showed her that the reason the developer was having to rebuild everything that he was given was because she hadn't clearly communicated in the wireframes what her vision for that thing being built was. If I gave this wireframe to everybody in this room, I would get 15 different versions of notifications. You would build me your notifications, not my notifications. And if you don't build me my notifications, I, as the client, am not happy. So this is a trap that humans fall into, is we tend to get very hand-wavy with things in the assumption that everybody can just read our mind. So that means that when you are describing parts of a page like this, you can see that the video in the bottom left clearly has the controls along the bottom. That lets you know that there should be video controls. The gallery that's in the middle on the bottom there has 4 images in it. Not 2, not 3, 4, not 16. So you know how many thumbnails are going to have to go in there. There's an approximation there of 4 links in the attachments on the right-hand side. You can tell that there's going to be about 2 paragraphs of text showing in the middle. There may be more text, and that might be a scrollable div. But you know that around 2 paragraphs are going to show there, and you've got a good sense of how much data and what types of data need to go in the profile section up at the top. You also have a good sense of what the relationship is between each one of the 5 pictures on that page and the rest of the data around it. So this now becomes a much better wireframe to work from than this. The other thing that people tend to do with wireframes is they tend to see white space and absolutely get revolted by it. White space is your friend. This is an example of taking a wireframe and filling in every possible bit of white space with something just to keep there from being white space. What happens when you do that is you start inventing features that don't exist. And this is the other place in your development where squirt bottles apply, where wouldn't it be cool if kicks in, because you're looking at the page and what the data that you're planning to put on that page, and then you start to see it and the neurons start to fire and all over again. Oh, well, wouldn't it be cool if there was this thing over here, and wouldn't it be cool if we did this with this? Yes, it would be, but do you need to? And if you really, really, really need to, if you look at it and realize that there is something genuinely missing that prevents you from delivering an MVP, isn't it better to figure it out now when you're just drawing pictures than Saturday night, Sunday morning, when you're like 90% of the way through your development and suddenly go, oh crap, we forgot something that you now have to come up with schema for, that you have to come up with routes for, that you have to come up with the full plan of how you're going to implement that and then figure out where you're going to put it on an already built page. That's not the position you want to put yourself in as a dev. That's anxiety inducing. So don't worry about there being white space. In fact, if I go back to this and I really want to get rid of the white space, maybe I don't like that there's a sidebar, I can just stretch out the image, stretch out the text, or maybe take the notifications and make them be the sidebar. I haven't added any features to my page. I've just made the ones that are there use the space better. This is Tetris at this point. This is packing for a 5-day trip. It's not a major roadblock to you being able to deliver your application. There's no rules that say that you have to put notifications at any particular point on the page. You can put them wherever you want them. There are conventions, there are design patterns, but there's no rules that say that it has to be done a certain way. So when you're doing your wireframes, you're going to want to look at the data that you're planning to put on the page. And you're going to want to cross-reference that with your ERD. Because if you are putting data on a page that doesn't come from your ERD, one of the two places is now wrong. And if it's in the wireframe and you absolutely need it, well, now is a great time to go and figure out that it needs to be in your ERD. And if it's in your ERD and it's not on your wireframe, that might be okay. There's probably going to be metadata in your database that you don't necessarily need to show on your wireframe. You may have time and date stamps in your database that you're going to use to sort things, but that doesn't necessarily have to be reflected in the UI. Just because you have a field in the database does not mean it has to go in the wireframe. But if you start putting things in the wireframe that don't exist in the ERD, you're now inventing features. So be careful with that. Once your wireframes are done, you get to the part that we call storyboarding. And quick show of hands, who's read a Dilbert comic? Okay, who's read any comics ever at all? Okay, fortunately all of you. You've now seen a storyboard. You know what a storyboard is. Storyboarding is something that's done in film and TV a lot. It's also done with like drama, like theater, opera, things like that. It's the art of telling a story in a chronological format. You're deciding what the scenes are and what order they're going to go in, and then it is your job as a director or your job as a developer to figure out how to connect those scenes together from one to the next. Especially in the case of something like a website, this is the order in which you want users to consume your application. This is the workflow for your user. So if this was a comic or a movie, like any standard comic is a storyboard, just by definition. But you would also do this if you were planning out a TV show or a movie or a theater stage production, where you're deciding what the key scenes are and how to connect one to the other. So on the web, we want to do this by figuring out what order people need to go through our routes in, what order they need to go through the pages that we have wireframed. So this is a timeline. In fact, if you go and look at the navigation of any site that you like to go to, any site you like to visit, go and look at their navigation. That navigation is the order in which they want you to consume the site. It's just a standard. So you're planning the happy path. You're planning that ideal path for users going through the individual features that you have planned to build. For example, if this was a blog, you'd probably want to sign up first, if you were doing sign up, and then you'd want to go to the page that shows all the stories, and then you'd probably want to go to the create a story page, and then you'd probably want to go to the submit story page, and then you'd probably want to go back to the index of the stories to see the one that you created. And if you're choosing to edit, well then that's going to take you to the form, which is going to take you back to the story. Like there's a very clear path that the user is going to go through in order to move through the different features that you plan out. Well, guess where you get that path from? It's almost like these are important or something. User stories. And especially if you are using a project management tool, in fact, even if you are just using post-it notes on the window, you can mix and match and reorder these any which way you want until you get that right path going. And once you've got that path, you now know how to link all your pages together, which is, I can tell you from experience, a hell of a lot easier than having a whole bunch of pages already linked together and now deciding that they now need to link in a different order. That will drive you insane, because you're not just managing anchor links and form submissions on the front end, you're also managing redirects on the back end. So this form submission needs to go to this route, and then that route needs to redirect this other thing, and then I need to click on a link on that page to get to the next thing. And if you have to reroute all of that manually, there's no tool to do it for you. If you have to reroute all of that manually, it's tedious and prone to error. So figure out the happy path first. Then you only have to build it once. Now let's talk about design, because wireframing, storyboarding, and design kind of all go together in one big sticky ball. You're still not ready to code. Yes, question. Do I have a recommendation for how to do the storyboards? Yes. Typically what I do is literally grab some post-it notes, and I draw out very quick versions of my wireframes on them with, like, a note with which route it is at the top. So I'll draw out a very quick version of the wireframe, note what route it is, and I will go up to a window or a wall or a whiteboard, and I will mix and match until I get it in the right order. If I'm in something like Trello, I can do that with just dragging cards around. I can also go into something like Real-Time Board, which is a great app for you can get a 14-day trial with it. You only need it for 5. Yeah, you can go into something like Real-Time Board and do the same kind of mix and match, move things around nice and easy. Whether you want to do it physically in an analog way or whether you want to do it digitally, give yourself that freedom to be able to order and reorder and shuffle before you start committing anything to actual text. Yeah, good question though. So design matters, and it matters a lot. There's a reason that social media sites are blue, financial sites are green, food sites are red or yellow. There's a reason color theory is important. There's a reason that certain font faces look good on the web and others look good in print. There's reasons why certain font sizes and font relationships get picked. And all of that stuff 100% matters. Whether you have rounded edges, whether you have gradients, whether your app is centered in the middle of the page, all of those things do matter. And I don't want to take away from their importance in delivering a quality product. Great big however, we're training you to be devs, not designers. This should not be where you get stuck. There are plenty of free resources out there. There's Dribbble, there's Folio Focus, there's Smashing Magazine, there's Behance, there's design sites all over the place. And I want to dispel a myth that comes up quite frequently. That myth is there are no layout police that are going to kick down those blue glass doors or the nice crown molding in the Edison. There are no layout police that are going to come bursting in here if you use another site's layout. You could even use another site's CSS if you wanted to. It's free and open on the web. You're not going to get arrested for copyright. No one's going to be mad at you for making your site look like somebody else's. That's not the way the web works. There isn't a trademark you're going to infringe unless you literally call your site Facebook. That's where people start to get angry in a legal sense. You can go and take a WordPress theme if you want to, rip it straight out of WordPress, replace all the PHP with EJS, figure out what content needs to go where, and ta-da, you have a layout. Ta-da, you have themes. Ta-da, you have colors and typography and forms and all that stuff taken care of. Cool, fantastic. Nobody's stopping you from doing that, and you should not feel blocked by picking a design. What you should do is go and look at other sites like the one that you intend to build. Look at what some of the common patterns are that they use, and then decide if you want to make yours look like theirs. If you want to make yours look completely different, great. Go find a site that looks like what you want it to look like and be digitally inspired. Nothing is going to stop you. No one is going to get mad at you for making it look just like something else. I promise you that that's not why police will come bashing down the door. And it's totally okay if it looks like every other website ever. There's a reason this is every business website, every startup site that's on the web right now. There's a title bar at the top with some navigation. There's a great big hero image in big white text, usually over a GIF or a movie, that tells you why they're unique. Be impacted. Start now. Big button to click on, is to tell you to sign up. It might be a carousel of different things running behind that. Either way, that big image there, it moves. It almost always does. And then underneath that is a colored bar with a quote. It's not a testimonial, it's a quote. And it's a quote about why this is going to change your life. And then there are always 3 columns that list the different features that particular product provides. Usually there's another bar underneath that, and that's where the testimonials go. And then you get the footer that has the social media in it, and the copyright, and the contact us, and the careers link, and all that stuff. Go ahead, rip this layout off. Nobody's going to get angry at you. If this is your landing page, it's totally fine. In fact, if you go look at the Lighthouse Labs website, you might notice a certain pattern. Hi, Sarah. How you doing? Yeah, it's a common pattern that's used by a lot of businesses. So the reason the design is important at this point is because if you're trying to do development without design, it's like doing origami blindfolded. You're going to get folded paper. It is not going to be a pretty crane. If you don't know the layout that you intend to build, you can't write HTML. You literally don't know what you're building. And if you ever tell me, oh, well, I'm just building this to test my data. No. Now you're just asking yourself to build and rebuild and rebuild and rebuild on top of that. If you want to test your data, that's what the command line's for. That's what the REPL's for. That's where you test data. You don't need HTML to test data. Well, I want to test that it shows up on the web. Really? So you want to test that a web framework can serve content to the web. How is that any different than just doing the query normally? Is it going to look different in your browser than it does on the command line, other than color? Yeah, no. So make sure you have a design in place before you start writing markup. And in particular, you're going to want to find a UI framework that's going to help you deliver whatever layout and whatever design you've chosen to do. Grid frameworks make building easier. And when I say grids, I do not mean CSS Grid. I mean one of the grid frameworks that is out there, like any one of the ones that's going to pop up on this page. There's a bunch of them. This isn't even the greatest hits. This is some of the bigger ones, but it's not all of them. Each one has their pluses and their minuses. Some of them are Sass-based, some of them are CSS, just plain CSS. Some of them are Flexbox, some of them are box model. I mean, I know how much this particular cohort loves CSS anyway. So the question is, which one do you use? Well, I'm going to tell you that you want to pick either Bootstrap or Foundation. Material UI is another one that comes up quite frequently that people like to use, though Material is a bit more complicated than Bootstrap or Foundation. The reason we suggest one of these two for your midterm is because these are industry standard frameworks. These are the big kids on the playground in terms of grid-based frameworks, and they are all over the place. Hundreds of thousands of legacy products are out there that use Bootstrap and Foundation. Inevitably, at some point, you're going to probably end up having to use Bootstrap or Foundation or both in your career. And it's better to go ahead and learn them now when you have people who can help you learn them than having to suddenly be dropped into client work or working for a company and they're just like, What do you mean you haven't used Bootstrap yet? Everybody uses Bootstrap because everybody kind of does. Pick one of these two. They are Coke and Pepsi. They both do the same things. They both do it equally well. They both have great documentation. Pick one. I need to talk about Git. You're still not ready to code. You're closer, but you're still not ready to code. But I have to talk about Git. So you may remember talking about Git on day one. You may remember talking about what the good Git workflow is supposed to be on day one. Talking about things like, maybe branching, maybe commits, maybe conflicts, all of those kinds of strategies that were discussed in bringing Git into your everyday workflow. And I'm sure that for all of you, your Git practices have been impeccable for the past 4 weeks. I'm sure that if we were to go back and look at all of your repos individually and really dig in and analyze your Git commit messages, and if you decided to get into good branching strategies, that they would have been lovely. I'm sure there are no Git commit messages that are ASDF, JKL, shit. Like, I'm sure there's none of those in there. Or fixed is one of my favorite Git commit messages. Fixed. Fixed what? Another good one I've seen is made progress. On. And then the really good classic one is committed. Cool. You probably should be. So, your Git practices, you're going to clone the repository that you're going to start off with. You're going to do your branches. Branches are where development work should be. Development work should not be on your master branch. Now is the time to get in the habit of doing a branch for each feature, and a branch for each bug fix, and a branch for each content change. And when you're in that branch, you're going to code. And you're going to write a lot of code, and you're going to save files, and you're going to iterate, and you're going to fix all the bugs that come up from what you create. And then once you're done coding that feature or fixing that bug or adding that content, and you've committed everything in that branch, you're going to check out master. And you're going to pull. Every time you go back to master, your reflex should be to do git pull origin master. Once you pull, your next thing you'll do is you'll merge in whatever feature, whatever bug fix, whatever content you've just been working on from your other branch. And then you're going to take that and you're going to push, git push origin master. And you're going to go back up to step 2 and you're going to lather, rinse, repeat as you work on the next thing. Git and shampoo have a lot in common. Now you'll notice that there are asterisks on step 3, step 5, and step 6. That's because after you do each one of those steps, you're going to test your code to make sure it works. Because if you do not do tests at that point before moving on to the next step, you run the risk of causing a whole bunch of conflicts or introducing a bunch of bugs. For example, step 5, when you pull, you're pulling the rest of anybody else on your team who's committed, you're pulling their code into your master branch. So you want to test and make sure that code works on your machine. If it doesn't, you don't want to merge your code in unless your code is specifically fixing the bug. Because otherwise, you're just putting good code on top of bad. If you've ever worked in a restaurant and you've made coffee, there is a rule that you learn that if you have 2 pots of coffee and one is fresh and one is old, you do not mix them together because you just get a pot of old coffee. Don't do that with your code. If you have good code and bad code, don't put the good code on top of the bad code because now you just have a bigger pile of bad code. No matter what else you've put in there, if there are bugs in what you are doing, those have to be fixed first. And especially if it's code that you pulled down that somebody else wrote, that is a great time to be an adult and be a professional and talk to your team and say, hey Bob, and I hope I never have a student named Bob, hey Bob, this code that you pushed broke my build. Can you take a look at that? They wrote it. Bob wrote it. Bob knows it better than anybody else. So Bob needs to be able to fix that code, push a fix up to master, then you can pull it down, test that it works. Now you can merge your code in. And this is going to be your dev workflow for the next 5 days. And just in case you haven't had good Git practices, though I know you're all great, now is the time you really want to start building this in as a habit. Git, as we said on day one, is not something you can wait for day one of your job to then go, you know what, I'm finally going to figure out this version control thing. That's not when you need to do it. It needs to be muscle memory before you get there. And please, if you have any affection left for me after the past 3.5 weeks, if there is any ambition in your heart to be a really, really great developer, please don't code on master. Just please. Master is the clean working version of your product at any given point. If you're doing development on master, it's no longer the clean working version. Now is the time to build a good branching habit, because that is going to allow you to segregate the code that's ready to deploy, the code that's ready to share with the rest of your team, with code that you're still working on. Branching allows you to try out multiple different ideas for solving a problem and figure out which one works. That's not possible if you're doing it all in master. And at any point, if somebody says, hey, can you show me how your product works, you should be able to hop over to master, run it, and be able to show off what works at that point. You shouldn't have to worry about schemas or migrations or code bugs or whether a function is finished yet or not. It should just be working on master at any point. Even if all it does is shows an empty page and throws no errors, that's your start. That's working on master. So, good news. Yeah, sorry, question. Is it a good idea to incrementally merge master changes into your feature branch? Only if you need those changes to build what you are building. Because at any point when you branch to create a feature branch, you're branching off of whatever the current state of master is anyway, so it should be relatively current. But if you get into that feature and you're like, oh crap, I don't have the whatever feature yet, and somebody else is working on that, once they push it, then yes, you can merge master into your feature at that point, and it's still going to merge back in easily because that's now part of master. But you should only need to incrementally merge them in if you need that code in order to complete the feature or the bug fix that you're working on. Yeah, good question though. So good news, you are almost ready to code. You are at the point of project planning and development that we call scaffolding. Scaffolding should be done as a pair program activity, meaning the whole team is going to sit around one computer and get that one computer to work. So here's your checklist. Somebody on the team is going to set up a GitHub repository and add the rest of the team as collaborators. That does not make you the team leader. That does not make you the project manager. All it means is that you own the repository. That's it. We're going to keep it public. We're going to keep it open source. You're just going to create, there's got to be a repository. So somebody's going to create it and add the rest of the team to it. On one person's computer, you're going to download and install all the resources that you plan to use. You will notice that there is a, in the midterm project in Compass, there's an activity that's, I think it's called setting up your Git repo. We provide you with a skeleton Express app that's already been built that has one route pre-configured in it. It is configured as an Ajax route. That does not mean that you have to use Ajax for all your routes. We just did it that way for demonstration purposes. But there's a pre-built node skeleton available to you. You're going to get that downloaded. If you're using Bootstrap, you're going to add that in. The list of NPM modules that you've decided to bring into your application, you're going to NPM install all of those. You're going to want to use CDN links wherever possible. So Bootstrap has content delivery network links, like the link tags and script tags that you're going to put in your header. jQuery, you're going to use the CDN tag for that. Don't worry about having to download a local copy of that. Use the cached version. It'll make it go faster. And then this is the part where most people make a mistake. Once you have everything installed, make sure that you can type npm start and get the initial page up. If you can't, you are not ready to start coding yet. It has to work on that one computer. So as a team, troubleshoot the bugs. Get that first page to come up with no errors. Because at that point, like this also is install connects. This is connects to your database. So that needs to be done as well. So get that first page to be able to load, and then whatever problems came up in getting that first one to load, the whole team now knows how to solve them. So now you can move on to the next step here, which is push what you've done up to GitHub. The rest of the team can clone it down to their machines, and then the whole team gets their machines set up before anybody starts coding. Because just because the first person's set up doesn't mean that they're like, okay, screw you guys, I'm off to code now. Have fun getting your environment set up. No, you are responsible for this as a team. Make sure everyone is at a baseline and you are ready to go before you start doing any of the tasks that you have outlined. Once that works, then you can decide on team responsibilities. You are practically ready to code. Your fingers are hovering over the keyboard at this point, itching. But you need to divide up tasks and figure out who's going to work on what. This is the hard part, because I'd love to be able to stand up here and tell you that I have a silver bullet solution that's going to make all of this easy. I'd love to be able to tell you that there is just one formula that every team uses, and that's what decides how to build an app. Unfortunately, there's not. There are many ways you can divide up tasks. You can do back-end tasks. Some person can work on back-end, some person can work on front-end, some person might own all the API work, some person might own all the database and migration work. You might decide you're going to make your app responsive, and so somebody's going to take care of all the CSS for that, and you're going to buy them beer. You might decide to break up tasks by feature. So, let's say Rachel is going to own the index page. Like everything that's a feature on the index page, she's going to own that. So she's going to do the front end and the back end. She's going to write the HTML, the database queries. John's going to be doing everything on the edit page. So he's got to do all the form code, and he's got to do the post routes, and he's got to handle inserting and updating stuff in the database. So he's going to own that. Doing it by feature, not the worst way, because you end up touching everything. But you also end up crossing over with each other's work a lot, and you have to have great communication. If they get along, it'll work great. If they don't get along, it'll be a frickin' nightmare doing it that way. You may choose to do everything pair-programmed, and your initial reaction to that might be, okay, A, I haven't pair-programmed since week 1, so no. I don't like any of these people anymore. I've been with them for a month. Screw that. But you may also want to think, well, if I do it pair-programmed, isn't that going to slow me down? If there's anything you probably learned in week 1, it's how much faster that two heads are at solving a problem and getting things done than just doing it by yourself. If you do everything pair-programmed between now and Monday, you will get done and have a rock-solid product. You will not lose time. It is very possible to do everything pair-programmed. One person might choose to own the deployment. Great, more power to you. Ultimately, you're going to figure out what works for your team. Every team working on every app ends up dividing up work slightly differently. The one thing I do want to say to you, though, about the opportunity that you have here with dividing up the tasks is in the past 3.5 weeks, you've learned about back-end development, front-end development, database development. You know the major core pieces that you need to be able to build the apps that are outlined. However, every single person in this room, without exception, is coming into this project thinking, I don't know how to do all of this stuff well. I'm not solid on every single thing that has to be done. And that's a very common feeling. And you shouldn't be ashamed of feeling that way. The good news is the responsibility of building the entire app is not on each individual person. So as a team, you get to sit down and adult, professional, make decision on who is weak in which areas and who is strong in which areas. I encourage you to be transparent and honest and exercise good communication skills with this, because you now have 5 days to work on a project where you get to focus in a team environment, in a collaborative, supportive environment, on the things that you don't feel strong with. Be willing to say to your team, hey, I don't feel so good about CSS. Maybe I should work on that so that I can get better. I may need some help from you guys, but I want to take that on so that as of Monday, I feel like I'm stronger with CSS than I do right now. That might be database queries, that might be connects, that might be CRUD routes, that might be middleware and Express. Like whatever it happens to be willing to be honest with your team and say, I'm not so good at that, and I want to take that on, even if somebody else on the team is a rock star at it. The good news is you now have a built-in mentor in your team who's just awesome at that thing and can help you when you get stuck. They're an immediate resource for you. And you shouldn't take offense if you're really good at something, but somebody else is working on it. It's not going to affect your employment. It's not going to affect your boot camp outcome. What it's going to affect is their ability to feel successful coming out of this project. So you take the time to work on the things that you're not so good at, so that you come out of this also feeling successful. And if everybody does that, what ends up happening is everybody gets stronger over the 5 days, and the products ultimately are better because there's clear development for everyone. Good news. Now you're ready to code, because now you've done all the planning that you need to do so that you only have to build the app once. You have a clear path of what needs to be done, who's going to be doing it, what technologies you're going to be using, and what the parameters of each and every feature that you intend to build are. Yay. That's a great place to be in. Rather than, hey, let's build an app, everybody type. That doesn't work. Never works. It's never intended to work. When you get to front-end work, and all of you should be touching front-end a little bit at some point, please start with static pages. And when I say static page, I literally mean open up your editor and make an index.html file. Put the right stuff in the header that you're going to need, and write your markup there first. Because if your CSS doesn't work there, it's not going to work when you convert it into EJS view files. Guaranteed. Making it dynamic doesn't help. In fact, it makes it harder because you want to make sure that all the pieces are being put together. Once you build a static version of a page, it's really easy to break that out into partials because you're just copying and pasting chunks of markup where they need to go. Decide as a team on the class and the ID nomenclature now, because jQuery is going to need to attach to these IDs. The classes are going to probably be used in multiple places on multiple pages. That's the point of a class. So decide on what they're going to be named now, because the whole team's probably going to have to use that stuff. Use placeholders. I'm going to send you a list of a whole bunch of different placeholder resources that are out there. philmurray.com, placekitten.com. If you haven't been to meettheipsums.com yet, it's great. Just be aware that some of them are NSFW. And most importantly, when you are starting and working with your front end, we as devs have a confirmation bias. We hate to see our code break. Break your code. Your layout expects a certain quantity of data. We saw on that profile page that it expected 2 paragraphs in the middle. And that's, what was pushing the bottom row there down to the bottom of the page. What happens if you only have 1 sentence there? Does your footer now jump up? Figure out how to keep it down at the bottom. Make sure that if you have a text field that's expecting 25 characters, that it still works in layout on the page if there's 2 characters or 2,000 characters. If you're expecting great big hero images and somebody pastes in a 300 by 300, JPEG, does your app handle that well? There's CSS that will allow you to handle word wrap, truncation of text fields, so it just automatically adds a ... at the end. There is things like max width and min width that you can use for images. Make sure that your font sizes are sane for being able to read. And don't fall into the trap. If the 5 most dangerous words are "wouldn't it be cool if," the 6 words that you want to avoid are "it looks great on my screen." Great, so we'll just have the entire internet use your computer for using that app, and then we'll be good. We'll just pass it around. Everybody will be happy. It doesn't work that way. It has to work on a 13-inch monitor. It has to work on a 60-inch TV, or 70 or 80 or whatever this thing is. You can get suntan from standing in front of it. Try it out on different monitors. Try it, connect to external monitors and see how it works then. Resize your monitor. Zoom in and out with Control plus minus or Command plus minus on your screen to see what happens if you try different zoom levels. Because when you get up here and you're demoing, you're probably going to need to zoom in for people to see it. Every instructor that comes up here that goes to a website, we end up having to zoom in so that the rest of the room can see it. Plan for the fact that you're probably going to have to do that with your app when you demo. Plan for that ahead of time. When you get to the back end, start with your data objects always. 2 require statements in your REPL will allow you to bring connects in to the node REPL, and then you can test every one of your connects queries. Make sure your queries work in the REPL before you try and stick them in your application. If they don't work in the REPL, if you can't get the data you need, it's not going to work in your route. It doesn't magically start working just because you dump it into Express. Test different callbacks. Test that you are validating the data before you insert it. And please, 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 code atomically. Modularize. Refactor. Take the time to write good code. Just because you're on a timeline where there's a very clear deadline that you have to stand up here at 11:30 on Monday morning and demo your app doesn't mean you have an excuse to write bad code now. Take the time to make sure your code is something that the rest of the team can sit down and work on if they need to. If you win the lottery or get abducted by aliens or something happens to you, which we don't want anything to happen to anyone, but are you leaving a pile of spaghetti behind for your team to maintain? And then this is the last thing I need to talk about. Unfortunately, this is the big one. So you've heard me say a couple of times, be an adult and be a professional. The single thing that will torpedo one of your projects between now and Monday is not code bugs. It is not running out of time. It's not even if your laptop, decides to erupt in flames. That's not going to torpedo your project. Poor communication is what will do it every single time. There are many communication tools available to you. Slack is an obvious choice because you're all already on a Slack network. Make a private group, make a channel for yourself, add everybody on the team to that channel. Great, you now have a place to communicate about your development. But it doesn't matter if you use Slack or Telegram or WhatsApp or Meet or whatever they're calling Hangouts now, or Skype or Signal or WeChat or pick something, don't care. Like literally just pick one. And as a team, agree that you're going to communicate using that. One of the reasons the communication is necessary is because there's a weekend coming up. There are 2 days of your app's development where you are not required to be in the space. So if you as a team member are going to choose to work from home Saturday and Sunday, the rest of the team needs to know that. They need to know when to expect you to be doing code. If you have a doctor's appointment, if you're going to the gym, if you're going to a concert, if you have a date, if you just want to sleep in, if you're doing laundry, if you're just going to go, ride the slopes on Cyprus, make that clear to your team so they know when to expect things from you. If you're going to be coding for 14 hours a day and you're barely going to sleep and you're not going to stop to eat, let your team know. They will hopefully bring you soup and wet wipes. But pick one. And I mean, seriously, we don't care what you use. Pick something as a team and stick to it. Because communication is what is going to allow you as a team to succeed in building this app. It's not going to be because Bob didn't carry his fair share. It's going to be because Bob stopped communicating because he felt bad, and then he ghosted on you, and the rest of the team hated Bob and had to carry his load, and that's what caused problems. Not just Bob not doing a particular thing that he was supposed to do. Use Trello. Trello's free. If you haven't used Trello before, it's not hard, I'll tell you that. There's some really good videos on YouTube and on the Trello site about how to use it. If you manage to grab me between 11 and 11:30, I can give you the 5 to 10 minute quick tutorial on how to use Trello. It is dead easy, but Trello is where you track your project management tasks. It's different than just saying on Slack, oh, hey, I'm going to start working on the index page now. Because each one of the tasks that you have to do, like each one of the user stories, each one of the routes that you planned out, you can now you can write out a user story as a card in Trello, and everybody can see that story. Everybody can see what's attached to it, which routes it's supposed to service, the link to the wireframe, any comments that have been put on there. You can list each one of the routes that you need to build as an individual task in Trello. Those routes can be assigned to people. So as they're moving them between lanes like to do, doing, and done, you can immediately see the status of each and every task, like at a glance. There's a free mobile app that has the exact same functionality. Trello updates in real time. So if Sarah and I are working on a project together, and let's say we bring in, Danella from Calgary, and we make a change on our Trello board here, Danella immediately sees it in Calgary. And then when she makes changes, we're immediately going to see them here. And so we would all be communicating on Slack, and now we've got a distributed team, and everybody's in sync as far as what's being worked on at any given time. Be adults, be professionals. This is your time to practice those two skills. That's it for me. Anybody have any questions? Got crickets and tumbleweeds here. Calgary, how are you folks doing? Yes. Should you plan out your modularization as well? If there are going to be functions that you see needing to be used by multiple parts of the application, then yes, you're going to want to plan out putting them in a module ahead of time and probably building those first so that the rest of the team has access to them as they're building. That comes under the store your data the way you're going to query your data. There's going to be certain manipulations or certain actions that you're going to do very frequently. If you're using an API, for example, there's certain calls to that API that probably everybody's going to have to do. Sure, modularize that, put it in its own, its own file. That's a file that everybody gets to require into their work and go from there. Calgary says they're good. So I'm going to send two things out after this lecture. I'm going to send out this slide deck so that you have access to like those checklists and those to-do lists. And I'm also going to send out a gist that has a bunch of links. There's a link to the user stories article on Medium. It takes about 9 minutes to read, and it is 9 great minutes. In fact, I encourage you to read it about every 6 months because it really is a pretty well done article, and it will help solidify ideas about planning features. The gist also has a bunch of free resources for doing things like ERDs and wireframes and full mock-ups, like where the layout and the color theory and the fonts are all there. And you can map out all your interactions in them. There's a bunch of free content generators, so placeholders for images, lorem ipsum generators. So I'll send that all out as the notes for this lecture. One other thing that's going to happen is I believe Kelly's going to reach out with a spreadsheet so that each team can let her know what app you're going to be working on. That's just something that we track to keep track of. So you'll let her know what app you're going to be working on when she asks for it. Cool. Thanks, folks.